All right. We got Cesar back on a friction log. It's been a long time, man. Long
Yeah,
time.
I know. I'm behind the scenes doing some editing, but you guys are having fun. It's good to have Kinsey as a guest host from time to time. But it's good to talk to you. I don't know. I feel like we have done a lot of product development opinions on that I'm really, I got excited and I had a couple of use cases. So we have a topic for today regarding me doing more than just talking and editing podcasts, which makes me excited.
Yeah. So today's episode, we're going to talk more about Supabase. We've talked about Supabase in the past, the hackathon that I did and some other things. And I have some decent experience on it. So we wanted to do a proper friction log. It's been a while since we've done a proper friction log here on the show. So this is a Supabase friction log, and this is the first time Cesar's used it. And again, I've used it with a hackathon that Supabase did, and then with one study, the company that Kinsey and I own, we use Supabase for our database. We maybe some different use cases than what Cesar you use, but what's your use case? So this is your first time using Supabase, and before we get into a friction log, it's always good to understand like what's the use case, where's the why. So tell me about your use case.
So I have a couple, which makes it better or worse. I don't know. It's a lot of trade-offs. The first one is my dad has a point of sale system that I built a while ago, right? And it's a desktop application. It has a web component. It has a MySQL database, right? But that MySQL, licensing and all of that, like I think I'd move it to MariaDB at some point, but really like somehow hosted and managed by me. And I'm trying to get away from that. And I'm trying to make it a little bit faster, just trying to modernize it. So that's one thing, which implies different stages, which is like, hey, I need to move the data into the Supabase instance. I also want to restructure, right? That application has been built throughout the years, and I have made some good decisions and a lot of bad decisions. And I think I know a little bit better right now. So some restructure. So there's a migration stuff going on there, not only of data, but also on structure. And then just modernize the stack a little bit. So like have the web application do pretty much everything, drop the desktop application. If I can find a way to not cry when I'm trying to build code for printers, there are the receipts and all that. That's always the tedious part. But that's one project. And then the other one is, I would say it's like a platform for managing events, kind of like concerts, but like for the Latin American community. So basically events, venues, things like that for small things, not like, think about like Ticketmaster versus Ticketmaster for the little guys, right? Like very, very simple use case, not a lot going on, but excited to work on some of that.
Okay. All right. That's pretty cool. That's solid. I remember years ago you telling me about that POS system or that you built
Still
for your
running.
dad years ago. Same thing, built on the same stack and everything, huh?
It's been updated because it has a component around. So this is back in Mexico. So there is a digital invoice system. I always have a hard time translating that. But so that one gets updated every couple of years by the government. And there's like new things that you need to add, older things like new version and whatnot. The painful parts are basically that, because that has some XML involvement in there, some signing
soap.
and
The government loves soap.
Yes. And then the printers portion of it is the other one, which I still haven't decided what I'm going to do. Like I could try to go from the web straight to the printer if it's available, or I can keep basically the agent that runs on the PCs and just kind of like beam polling for any new printing, or find some sort of push, right? Like, but work it more like an agent and not like a desktop application with the agent. So those are the complex things, but you got to start somewhere. And databases, I think when you talk about your Supabase hackathon, I was like, why don't I just try it, right? Like it's small, it feels like this is the right solution. I don't want to do a lot of back-end code. Think of like our conversation about MBAS and the future of them, which it's something like Supabase. So that's how it got started.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. So let's get right into the log then. So we always like to start with the positive. So I think it's appropriate to start with the delights. So I'm really, really anxious to hear. I know you have some notes on this, but like, tell me some of the delights. Like, this is the first time using Supabase, and there's a lot to Supabase besides just like you said, you're replacing MySQL and you're moving over to Postgres. That there's a whole ecosystem of Postgres that's interesting, but Supabase brings with it a lot of other stuff. So tell me about some of the delights that you had when you were trying this out.
Okay. So the product, what I will call the product catalog, right? Like, as you said, Supabase, because it sounds like database, like a super database, maybe that's where they came from. I don't know. So that was one thing, right? Like getting an API out of the box. I don't have to write any code. I'm being very conscious about the time that I have to write this. So that was great. And then when I started talking to you about your use cases, I don't have any AI or vector use cases like the hackathon stuff that you did, but I did notice like edge functions, which it's something that I need to build. Like there is some custom logic to sign those XMLs to be sent to the server at the government's data center or something, right? I also was delighted by the fact that it offers the storage out of the box, because those XMLs need to be transform into PDFs at some point, right? To have a printer-friendly version. So that's a straight S3 bucket use case. I don't have to go and find somewhere else to store them, right? So it was like everything I need for this, I would say small to mid application, it's right there. That was one delight for sure. And then the documentation. As soon as getting started, totally transparent with you, I haven't done a lot of React or Next.js in a while, since we were working on the blog. And between all the changes on the Next.js side and having to do a new stack on Supabase, I really got like, hey, Supabase has very cool tutorials, very cool like getting started guides, documentation for me to just jump back into the web development mode, which I do enjoy. So documentation was good. The different options sometimes, and I still consider this a delight because you have a lot of options. You can also tell that it's a friction because you got to make some decisions, and those decisions might be difficult to undo later on. But I did like that, hey, you can do a REST API or you can do your GraphQL API, which I want to talk more about it. I'll say that's a couple of good initial delights that I got in the first like 30 minutes.
Okay, interesting. So on the documentation part, because I've played around with the documentation and stuff, did you run into anything that didn't work or that was confusing? That, like, I know we're on delights, but you put delights as documentation getting started was great, but that was not my experience. So I'm curious, like, which part was a delight, and then was there anything that there was a friction on that documentation? So I'm kind of leading the witness here. I realize that, but I am really curious.
No, I mean, we're just jumping into the frictions, but I do have some frictions with the docs too. At a high level, what didn't work is whatever they have a couple of links for migration from MySQL into Supabase or importing data. Like there are two different subjects that talk about the same thing. Neither works. Like out of the box, happy path, simple database, like this is gigs of data. This is a very small database and it didn't work. So that was a head scratcher.
Was that a documentation? Was that a documentation problem though, or is that something else? Actually, we can talk about that in a minute with the frictions, but I'm just curious if that's a documentation issue.
I would expect that if I follow the guide that says here's 4 things that you need to do to migrate your database, that will work with the simplest, how do I say it? The sample, right? Like I wasn't trying to do like 20 gig data, and we'll talk more about the migration stuff. So that was one thing. The other one was row level security and MFA, right? Multi-factor authentication. This is an internal app. I don't need to do any social logins. So on the multi-factor authentication portion of it, it was just a lot of information. Here's what you need to do. Here's this and that and blah, blah, blah. And like using something like Cleric makes it a lot simpler. probably you will have to pay for MFA on Clerk, but and Supabase will include it for free based on my initial research. But it was just like a lot of work that I'm like, really, do I need to go through all of this just to enable it? So that was
So is that just the way it appeared in the documentation? Like it appeared like it was a lot of work because of how or is it just implementation wise, it's just more complicated than Clerk does? Because a lot of Clerk stuff, you just click a couple buttons and fill out one or two fields. Like they really have a nice experience with some of that.
I think it's a little bit of both, but more the latter, right? Like once you get used to Amazon delivering the next day, when you order something online, it takes 4 days. You think it's a long time, right? Like I think it's that, right? It's not something that I'm not able to do. It's just a lot more that I was expecting it to do based on my experience with other tools.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, so all right, so it deviated a little bit on the friction, but I'm just curious about that. But anyway, so on the delight part of the documentation, you said it was organized by the products, so it was easy to kind of jump around and know exactly like this is what I'm looking at for this is what I'm looking like for that. So that was your delight for the docs, right? Okay.
Organized by products and the getting started and the tutorials, the sample repos, I was able to understand them pretty fast. So I like that.
Okay. And so that makes sense. And then the next point you said auth, and you have I'm looking at your notes here and your friction log notes, you said the Supabase versus Clerk analysis. So that's interesting to me because I have a lot of thoughts on those two versus each other or whatever. So what are the delights on Supabase there versus Clerk? I'm actually really curious.
I think it's the built-in. Like if I was to use social login, it's like super fast, get it up and running, and you go and build your first version of the product, right? Like I like that part. So Clerk is just another service that you need to sign up. And yes, there is an integration between Supabase and Clerk. So I just don't want to have to make a lot of these decisions that fast. And it just feels like them making the decision to offer auth, even if it's not as great as a company built for that purpose, it's a nice for somebody like me. So I really like that piece. I saw examples of both, and I thought both were clear using Supabase auth and Clerk. So overall, I just felt like regardless of which one I was choosing, I was be fine. And it wasn't a friction for me to go to my why, which was like building or modernizing this application.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. So the other delight, row level security, RLS. And so your note says it was very powerful to leverage different policies and stuff. So was that like an initial delight in your friction log? Like you're setting this up just like your log, and it's like, oh, it's already integrated and it just kind of works without having to do anything. Is that kind of where that was coming from?
Yeah. It's both. It's a delight because it is powerful. It makes me feel, or it makes me build a secure application out of the box. But it kind of remind me, as I was getting deeper into it, it reminded me a little bit of Firebase rules, which is like you need it's that one piece where you're out of your, I don't want to say your depth, but your stack in, like you have to go deep dive to really make it work, to really explore and exploit all the functionality within. So it was both a delight to get started, but also a friction because I know my time investment on that particular thing, it's going to be high, especially if I'm part of this modernization of it is for the system's clients, right? Like, so the system is managed by my dad's company, right? And they do all the internal management. But the idea is that customers will be able to log in and see their invoices and pull them out if they wanted to, right? So that one, I know it's going to be a significant investment just because I will have to worry about different types of users and different policies. And while I think the system is powerful, I am not eager to jump into those particular policies.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. I totally get that. I totally get it makes you feel powerful. It's SQL. It's very familiar, even though it's got its own little special flair, syntax flair. I have questions around it long term, like once you have multiple team members and if they're full stack or front end versus back end or whatever. Like I always have questions on like how readable is that when you're working a big code base, a big back end code base, and your policies, your security policies are outside of your code base and you can't easily read them when you go to a route and you're inferring stuff. Like I just wonder how that scales. I've always had like a hang up in my mind on that because it's at the database level.
Yeah.
But that's different. So that's a different kind of long-term study on, but I totally get it. Like as a first time experience thing, it is pretty cool. And their examples are neat too. Like they have some great examples and you just kind of copy paste them in that query editor and it just runs that and locks down a row and gives you permission per user based on their ID and whatever else. And it's actually really easy to get started with it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like not a big time investment, not a lot of complexity, but once you start to get into deeper stuff, like I don't know if I will use it for a bigger system, right? Like as you said, like a couple of teams, or once you have a platform that is larger than just a simple application, like I don't know how much you can extend that. And that's not worrisome for the projects that I'm working on. But I also have my other hat, which is like architect hat of my day job. And I just don't see, not that I don't see the opportunity, but I see a lot of challenges trying to apply it against the bigger systems that I used to work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about a permission system where you have multi-level control. And then inside of a group of people or an organization or company, they have their own, and then that company is owned by another company, which is owned by another company. Like it's just managing all that in RLS. I don't know. I'm suspicious of it, especially
and
since
the time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So time as a factor on like for example, on the media space where I'm working on most of my time, like you get these advertisers and they hire agencies, but the agencies only hire for a certain year or a certain period, right? So what happens if I'm running campaigns there? Like what happens when that agency stops having access to my campaigns? Do they see, or I get a new agency for 2024, 2025, can they see the history or not? I suspect that there's a lot of edge cases there that it just becomes very cumbersome to manage via policies. Yeah. So I don't know. The one thing that I like about Clerk that I'm going to say is the impersonation portion of it.
Oh yeah.
That seems pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like I don't think Supabase has that. At least I haven't seen that. So I just love that piece, but I can also move from Supabase to Clerk or vice versa. And they seem to work or get along fairly well. So when I get to that, we will see what happens. But for now, I think it's going to be Supabase off.
For one study, we use Clerk because it's just the impersonation stuff is nice because, we have companies and organizations. It's easy just to jump in and do that. But then they have a lot of security and bot protection and things that come with it. So it's pretty nice with that. But Supabase's auth is nice too. It's open source, but it's definitely more raw. It's not nearly as fine-tuned as Clerk is.
Which is my use case because I don't have organizations. Like this is an application for just that little company. And like it's just a handful of users and I need very basic RLS. And like until I start to worrying about clients, which are like single entities or end users, like I don't have to do much. But yes, it's good to have options. That's all I'm going to say there.
Yeah. All right. The other delight you had is awesome community on Discord. So that's interesting. Am I on that? Hold on. I got to open up Discord. Am I in the Supabase community? I think I am. I don't know. Discord sometimes I get lost in Discord, man. I don't know. It's,
we're all, me too, because we're all.
Is that what it is? Is it being old? I don't know. I think it's ugly.
Oh, it is bad.
It's terribly ugly. It's like when you use products like Linear and some of these other, they're just gorgeous, and you jump into this thing, you're like, let's just throw everything on the screen at once. Yeah, I am in the Supabase community. Yeah, okay. So tell me about it. Why do you love it so much? And why like you said in one of your notes, you said all of the knowledge is there. It sounds like they should train their documentation like an AI bot on their community, it sounds like. So tell me about that.
That's where I found my solution for the migration stuff, right? Like I was stuck, Google wasn't helping me. And I just gave it a try, joined the community. I did a search, somebody run into the same thing and say, hey, this doesn't work. By the way, if there is somebody from Supabase, your tutorial around data migration doesn't work. I don't think they have fixed it because I run into it. But yeah, that's where I found my solution. So now I go and search stuff in there, and I think it's pretty good. I think there's a lot of stuff in there. I would agree with you if we digress into Discord. It's like an ugly Slack, and it's just the context. Like I have tech communities there, but also I have like this is a place where I play games with my friends.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, like my brain with so many context switching inside one app.
Yeah. I have used I remember what the channel's called, the Q&A community one or whatever. It is nice. I've definitely searched through there and found stuff. It's kind of a shame it's locked away in Discord, really. But
yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know. And it's probably our age, but forums were awesome, right? Like the forum dedicated that you can search. They were always bad because you couldn't search, but with so many advances on search capabilities that it became pretty much free. I would say that in the future, I'm not surprised if we start to see forums as they used to be, just with better search and whatnot. So
yeah,
cool.
AI driven Reddit or forums or whatever. Yeah, for sure. And then you mentioned the final thing on your delight was integration with Resend. So I have yet to use Resend. It looks very awesome. At one study, we use loops, and then we use loops for some of the automated stuff, and then we use something else. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Hold on, let me open it up. Loops, and I don't remember what it is. Anyway, so Resend looks very attractive. I've been wanting to try it out. So I'm really curious if you've used this with Supabase and you put that as a delight. What's the delight? Is the delight actually just Resend, or is it that it works so great with Supabase? What is it?
So far, both. I'm going to have more, and we should probably do an episode just on Resend because I do think that it is like on key when we were talking about it, right? It's a very niche product with the great developer experience. And the fact that they have an integration with Supabase makes it a lot simpler. So I really like what I have seen so far. It's almost like the least of my worries right now. It's like I have to worry about sending emails and all of that. Like I got that through Resend and it seems to work fine. I'm going to focus on the other stuff. So more to come, but so far it's a delight.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, honestly, that's I think one of the best compliments you can give some of those services like Resend or Unkey is just like, oh man, I just integrate it and then I don't have to think about it. It's just there, whatever. It's not the thing that you use every day. It's not like linear or, something that you're just constantly touching every day. You just need it to work and work all the time. And when it's a great experience, you're like, yay, that's just great. Yep. I love it.
And a great experience sending emails is basically not worrying about it. Like I remember SendGrid was like, oh my God. Like, I don't know. It's just too hard.
MailChimp turned that into that for me. It's like, oh man, toward the end of the fish rules thing. And then, like when we sold the fish brain, we used MailChimp. I hated logging into it because it's like every time I log into it, they're going to pop up 500 pop-ups on this, that, and the other. And then I'm going to jump into this thing and they're going to say, oh, this is an extra $500 upcharge because you have 14,000 more users. And do you really want to send this email right now? I'm like, yeah, I wanted to until you told me that. So I don't know. I like MailChimp drove me crazy. So at the end, it was great. I don't know, 8 years ago.
What do we use for I guess I was meaning to ask you this, not on the show, but it's all content and it's all good. What do we use for friction log for our newsletter? What's in the back end of that? Is that MailChimp or what do we have?
I don't even remember. Yeah, I don't know. Wow. Again, back to, it must be great because we don't remember, right? It just needs to send the email so we don't need to think about it.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't remember. Emails. We don't spam people. Nobody's complaining about the amount of emails that we're sending. Maybe it's all blocked by spam protection and nobody gets emails from us. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like
right.
I need to look into that because I am just like figure out like how do I manage a newsletter distribution list through Resend? Like because Resend and
Mm,
Supabase is like good to notify the users that you have on Supabase and like
yeah,
somebody that puts
transactional.
your emails. Yeah, all
Hmm.
the transactional stuff.
Hmm.
But if I am building a distribution list, can I do it there? I don't know. More to come on Resend.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, that's where Loops comes in because Loops you can do transactional and you can do that, and you can do the in product stuff. So like if certain things happen, you trigger an email. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, so that was delights. Now let's talk frictions. This is called friction log. So your first friction here is the migration from MySQL to. Now you put Supabase, but it's migrate. Is it MySQL to Postgres? MySQL to Supabase and Postgres? Like what's the friction here on that?
So here is what I did following the docs, right? The doc says use PG loader, which you can use to do straight MySQL into the Postgres instance within your
Hmm.
Supabase, right? Because I was traveling, I also attempted to do the local environment, right? So this is basically Supabase way to work offline, I guess, or work locally. So I put up an environment and then I had to tweak that PG loader config file, basically removing a bunch of things because it wasn't
Hmm.
working. And then it kind of like worked. So basically I stood up MySQL and Docker computer, and then I have Supabase or the Postgres instance of Supabase running. And then at some point I was able to do it. It wasn't very stable, I would say, but if PG Loader reported that it was being loaded, then usually that was a success. So I did a few tries. When I try to do it against the web environment, right, or the SaaS instance, the
Yeah.
Supabase instance running on the cloud, it just never worked. It was timing out. I don't know if it had to do with the transition from IPv4 to IPv6. I don't know what
Oh.
happened, but like I tried the couple of methods that Supabase provides, like the different ports, they never work. It was always stopped. Like sometimes it was starting to processing some data, but then it didn't. The way that I migrate the data was, and you can tell me if I'm crazy, but I I grabbed the database from MySQL and I put it into its own dedicated schema on Supabase, right? So not on the public schema that you get by default. Just dump all
Oh,
the
just
data there,
another. Okay. All right.
another schema. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I could never make it work to the public schema because of that. I don't know what was happening there, but it just didn't work. So anyhow, before I get more into that piece, here's how I made it work. So I have MySQL. I spun up a Postgres instance, right? And then I migrate from MySQL into Postgres
Mm-hmm.
locally, not Supabase. And then I did a PG dump from
Yeah.
the Postgres instance, and then that worked. And then I load the Supabase Postgres instance with that dump file, that SQL file, and then it
Mm-hmm.
worked. And totally, like, again, it was just a matter of seconds. It wasn't the amount of data. It's something either with PG loader or the way that I don't know what's going on, to be honest, but I made it work. And now going back to how I was structuring the data, I just put it into a different schema. And that's basically what I want as an archive. And then I have my new, because I wanted to update the schema, right? There are fields that are not being used since years ago. And I wanted to clean it up a little bit. I built a script that basically I create my new database structure, my new schema structure that is under the public schema on Supabase. And
Mm-hmm.
then I just have a SQL script that basically migrates the data that I want and transforms the data that I need, right? So I have
Yep.
kind of like my archive database and then run that SQL and it gets into the Supabase and now it's accessible and I can start to add some of that RLS and all that fun stuff. So that's what I did. I didn't want to do both migrating the data into Supabase and transforming it at the same time. That seems a
Mm-hmm.
little more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's not the way to do it, but that's how I did it.
Okay, interesting. So the friction here is twofold. The first, well, documentation is a friction. Like the documentation said, do this, that didn't work. What you did sounds very logical. Like actually, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's totally probably what I would end up on too. It's interesting. But what the documentation you
Correct. And just PG loader doesn't work when you have a data source that it is. Well, I don't know. I guess PG loader is for non-Postgres databases as a source, so maybe it doesn't work for none of them. But for at least MySQL, it didn't work.
start off having like these really pretty docs and it's good, but you're moving fast and you're releasing new stuff. You're creating SDKs, you're creating docs, and the thing you wrote 3 months ago is deprecated, and this thing over here is now the new thing. But you don't want to delete that stuff because it's valuable, but that's old. And so you never really know which package should you use. And so you never really know, use that package anymore, use this package over here in cases, or like the SSR package for the app router Next.js stuff. It just flat out doesn't work in some use cases. And to the point where a friend of mine has a startup here in Palm Beach County, and they switched to Supabase, and they were trying to release their version 2 of their product, and they couldn't do it when they started using the SSR package. There was some bug in it or whatever, so they had to roll some things back to change it. So, and
Wow.
again, most of that is like documentation problem, I think. Some of it's a bug in the package, but most of it is documentation issues.
I
So
agree. And sometimes it's just a matter of tagging your old doc, because yes, it's useful for people that are not on the current version, especially as you have breaking changes. You're going to have some legacy documentation there. Just mark it properly, and you need a technical writer to help with some of that. And maybe that's what they're missing right now.
Yeah, like Vercel's example of they're trying to tackle it by they have that little picker. So wherever you're at, you always know, hey, this is documentation for the page router, this is documentation for the app router. And you can still get tripped up a little bit, but as long as you know you're looking at that like picker in the where is it, the top left or whatever, then you kind of know, okay, this is this scope completely over here. Which is good. Yeah. All right.
Agreed.
Other friction, you mentioned the data APIs. That's it. So I've yet to use those. I've actually refused to use those APIs because I don't use their SDKs either. So I'm actually really curious what the friction is on those.
So now I'm curious on why, like, what are you doing to pulling data, like, on your end? For me, I mean, two different ways to pull data that are, one is the evolution of the other one. Why offer both? Like, to me, it's one of those things that just as a friction it has stopped my flow. And I say, should I go with GraphQL, which is my initial intent, or why are they doing REST API? Do they have feature parity between the two? Are they investing more in one versus the other one? Like, I don't understand why they offer both. It's like, my head is like, it seems like I'm going to make a decision here, and I don't know the trade-offs of that decision.
That's interesting. So the friction is, which way do I go?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because I can do either.
Because it's like because everything on Supabase is open source, so they use like what, post-REST, right, for the RESTful stuff,
REST
and then
API.
whatever. Well, I don't know what they use for GraphQL, but it's just auto-generated GraphQL stuff, right? Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so the friction there is a decision thing. There's decisions you have to make. Actually, there's a UX law on this. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but you've got decisions to make, and it's harder the more options that are given to you. Actually, I'm going to go look up that. That is a UX law.
It's one of the laws for sure.
Yeah. So
curious, what like, how do you retrieve data from the database? What are you doing?
Oh no, it's all on the server side. That's what I'm
Okay.
doing. Yeah, I'm doing things on the server side, caching if I can, that kind of thing. I don't want a client to hit a database directly. I mean, I know technically in Supabase it doesn't because it goes through the Kong gateway and it goes through the REST thing, and so I know it's not hitting the database directly. But I want to control that, and I want to control that without having to run my own Supabase instance and then running those things. And part of it is a long-term thing. Long-term, maybe I don't use Supabase, it's just Postgres at the end of the day.
Like edge functions in between, or are you using
Yeah.
Next.js APIs?
Yes.
Okay.
To all of that. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
So you're back building middleware.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, obviously. Always. By the way, that UX law is Hick's law. The time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and complexity of choices. Hick's law. That's what that is. Yep.
Yep.
All right. That's interesting. Interesting. Sometimes, I mean, like this isn't a critique with Supabase because I'm sure they're offering these two for very good product reasons. Sometimes, like there's a human habit to be like, oh, well, we'll just offer whatever they want and they can do whatever they want with it. We'll just give them all the options. And sometimes that's actually a bad thing. Sometimes saying, oh, we'll just let the user do whatever they want to do. That sounds intelligent and smart, but it's actually the easy, lazy thing to do, number one. And number two, it actually causes friction when you do that. Now, this isn't a slam against Supabase. Like they're offering two options, and maybe they should make it clear, at least from your perspective, why you'd use one over the other, or like, is there a risk of not like them deprecating one over the other? I don't know. But in the product world and in psychology and in UX heuristics and stuff, sometimes offering options is a bad thing.
And same as Vercel and Next.js and even Supabase, right? Like they chose to use Postgres, right? Like they had an opinion there.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like expect them to have an opinion on data APIs, right? Like here's what we prefer. We support the other one, but here's what we prefer. Because usually I don't have a preference, which means I'll probably prefer what their opinion is based, because to me that translates you're going to spend more energy and resources and time on that particular way to things. I go with Supabase because it is an opinionated approach to a cloud solution, and in the data APIs, I see no opinion. I see two options with no trade-offs.
Yeah. Okay, that's excellent. Excellent point. Yeah, I like it. Okay. Next thing is friction row level security. So that was a delight, and now that's a friction. So you wrote the time investment is really high. So what do you mean by the time investment? In which way?
I
Like
just know that. Yes, I just know that I'm going to have to spend some time there. That it's not that I'm not going to benefit from it, because the application benefits from it, but it's something very unique to how they're doing it. So unless I'm using a Postgres DB with some other policies or things like that, I'm not going to use it anymore. So I don't know. It's just, I guess security is not my forte, I would say. So I'm always dreading some of that. And it just seems like it's going to be something that I want to do if I want to be secure, and I will probably do it. And I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Yep. Okay. I totally buy that. And then your final friction, you put MFA as a friction. So
have you looked at the implementation guide of MFA? It's just massive, right? Like, that was it. I saw it, I skimmed through it, and I was like, oh boy, I hope I don't have to deal with this. I'll probably do social logins or something. I don't know. I haven't thought about it. It's just, I don't even have the knowledge to say it is hard to implement. I don't think so. I skimmed through it. It seems okay. It's just a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or at least it's presented as a lot of work. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I've seen it. I totally get it. Okay. All right. Well, that's a pretty good, decent friction log. So in the end, you've got your delights, your frictions. What are your thoughts of Supabase? Like, what's your final word?
I'm gonna keep using it. That's the that's the thing, right? Like I want to actually go into edge cases. I want to feel the delights of some of the stuff that they offer, and I want to see where it comes short as well. But I found very interesting all the integrations that they have. So I'm curious for you, Rick, if you have a particular set of integrations that you have tried and you recommend for by use cases. And if you don't have, if we have somebody in the audience using them, I want to hear what people think, because I mean, you go into the integrations page and you see like 10 different options for auth. And we just talk about 2, but there are more like auth 0 and some of the other stuff. So I want to hear about that. But do you have anything that you use in particular?
So I don't think I use any integrations with Supabase in one study. I mean, we use Clerk, but we didn't integrate it with it. We have like these, the Clerk has webhooks. And so we have it where like somebody creates an account and then we'll go through and we'll stuff data into Supabase and sync it that way and stuff. So we have integrations, but there are integrations, not necessarily something that's out of the box. Honestly, I've looked at some of those and I'm like, half the time it scares me away. Now, I will say I love their extensions, like how I know it's not hard to install an extension on a Postgres database, but I just like going to their dashboard and clicking enable PG vector, click, enable this, click. So that's really nice. So their plugins are nice. And in fact, actually, I was on an older version of Postgres and as a result, older version of the Supabase platform. Back to friction on documentation, their support said, oh, if you want to upgrade, here's the documentation. And the first half of the documentation, it scared me away. I'm like, what? I went in and I couldn't find what the documentation said. And I wrote back to support and they're like, no, it's this right here. And on the other part of the documentation, it said, oh, all you got to do is click this button. And literally that's what I did. So once you get past the friction of the docs, it was easy. It upgraded that. It upgraded PG Vector to version 0.6, which is great because there's a lot of performance gains there. So that was nice. I like that, just easy upgrades, and it was kind of frictionless, really. Once you get past the docs, it was frictionless on that. So
that's good. That's good to hear. Yeah, I mean, I am excited, and I don't know why, because I don't really have a use case, but back when you and I were building mobile apps, I'm sure you run into this. A lot of offline scenarios, and they had like integration with PowerSync and Electric SQL, and like apparently those are 2 that are really good for offline. I didn't know they existed until a few days ago. I haven't tried them, but I built so many offline syncing business logic that I had for many mobile applications in many languages, and it was always painful. I don't know. I feel excited about it. I don't know, like, why would I use some sort of offline for my use cases? Maybe I will, maybe not. I don't know, but I'm just excited about those. And I saw a bunch, so I want to learn. So again, if you're watching this and you have used some integrations, let us know what have you used and how, and we can try them out.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that wraps up our episode. Thanks, Cesar. And then maybe we'll circle back in a future episode. And if you're going to ever use some of those offline sync things, that would be a fun thing, especially comparing that to Firebase. I've used the Firebase offline stuff, which is fantastic. Okay. So that's a hard one to beat. They're top tier, in my opinion. So that would be a good one. But yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for doing that friction log.
Thank you, Rick. It's always a pleasure. I'll see you next time.
Ciao.